Greetings. I'm Mistress Gabrielle Dauvergne. I'm a storytelling Laurel, and I founded the Pennsic Storytelling Academy. It's got to be over 10 years ago at Pennsic, and I'm here to teach you a few things about storytelling at the Academy virtually. It's really wonderful to be here. I didn't know if I was going to be able to do the Academy this year, so I'm very, very pleased to be able to do it virtually. I have notes in front of me, so I hope you will forgive me if I glance at them from time to time. Today's lesson is the basics of storytelling, and it will be a very short lesson, and the next video will be part 2 of the basics. So this is for bards who have not tried their hand at storytelling yet, or storytellers who would like a refresher course. And I should tell you that the reason I founded the Storytelling Academy so many years ago was because I noticed how people would sort of moan and groan at the bardic circles when a bard stood up and said, "I'm going to tell a story." And there's a reason for that. Bards need to learn, storytellers need to learn when to tell a story and when to walk away. Storytelling is not for every situation. And I hope that I come back and cover that in a little while. My background, I should tell you, as a storyteller started in the SCA many, many years ago. 1985, I was at an event where I had gone for, it was like maybe my second event ever, and I was sitting across from a gentleman. I had just gotten a rejection notice for some short stories I had written from a publisher, and I was very upset. And I was talking to him. It turns out he was a writer, and so we were talking about the ins and outs of writing. And he said, "Well, why don't you try telling your stories?" And I said, "What's that?" He explained to me the importance of the storyteller in the Middle Ages. The storytellers of the Middle Ages were the teachers. They were the bringers of news. They were the keepers of culture. They were the entertainment, because there were no televisions, no radios, and few people could read or write. So the storyteller had a great deal of importance. And the storyteller could make or break a king if they were very good at their art. And the kings knew this. And so the bardic storyteller was treated with great respect. So that is why I became a storyteller in the SCA. I joined, he also told me about a local mundane guild of storytellers. I'm in Buffalo, New York, which is the Ridrick Hale in the Kingdom of Alphamark. It was the East Kingdom at the time. And I found a local mundane storytelling guild, and I've been a member of that guild ever since. And I eventually quit my other work, which was in the arts, but I was an interior designer. I went on to become a teacher. And in between, storytelling grabbed me. And this is what I do full-time for my livelihood, if you can call it that. It feeds my soul more than any other job could. So that's a little background about me as mistress of the Storytelling Guild. So let's begin today's basic lesson with my rule of 3. And if you follow this, I think you will find yourself welcome at any bardic circle. That is right for storytelling. That's really important, and we'll come back to that. So the first thing, the audience is always the most important thing. You're not important. Your art is not important. The audience is number 1. If you keep that in mind, you won't walk into a bardic circle and say, "I'm a bard, I have a story, I'm going to tell you this story," and have the eyes roll, because you will have done a little bit of homework, so to speak. You will know if that bardic circle is full of rabble-rousers, people who just want to get drunk and sing songs, and there's nothing wrong with that, but unless you have a really short, active body story, they don't want to hear it. So you will know if the circle is right for storytelling. You will know if the audience is comfortable. I've been in bardic circles where I wanted to tell a story, but the traffic from the highway at Pennsic was so loud, I would have had to scream across the crowd and nobody would have heard me. I have a very soft voice. I don't mind that. It's okay. But it means that I'm likely not to tell a story at that circle. Is my story right for everyone in the audience? Are there a lot of children and my story is not appropriate? Is my story a children's story, but there's a lot of big burly fighters in the back of the audience and they don't really want to hear a children's story? Most of the big burly fighters I know would have fun anyway. But my point is that you gauge the audience. You are there for them. You're there to entertain them. And even if you're there with a healing story or a very meaningful story, a teaching story, a lesson that you want to give them, if it's not entertaining, they won't listen. So the number one thing to keep in mind is the audience. You are there for them, and they want to be entertained. Number 2, the story. You have a responsibility to do your homework on the story that you're going to tell. Have you taken a look at the context in which the story was told? The culture in which the story was told? Are you sure that that story is something that you want to tell as is? So many years ago, a storyteller in our local mundane guild came to me with a question about a story that she was telling. It was a Chinese folktale where the main character in the story was a painter, and his paintings were magical. They came to life. But he had to mix his own paint, and she said he mixed it with the spit of old men. And she said, every time I say spit of old men, I watch the audience faces. Now see, taking care of the audience, that's very important. And they're disgusted. And so I don't know if I should keep that in the story. Well, this is one of those exceptions where the audience might be grossed out by it, but the story is more important. And here's why. So she said, should I change that part of the story? I could make it easier on the audience. Well, yeah, you could. But here's the question. First of all, I want to tell you, anytime you are looking at a story, either to tell or listening to it or reading it, and you come upon something that makes you a little uneasy, that might be the most powerful, most important part of that story. Be aware of that. So I said, well, let's take a look at that. The spit of old men. I don't think it's in there just because. It must be there for a reason. Now, I collect a lot of books on symbology and dreams and, magic spells and all of that sort of thing from my research. And so I did a little research on that, and I discovered a couple of things. Well, first of all, I know that in the Asian societies, they venerate their elders. So the fact that it was an old man was very important. Could it have been a young man? No, it had to be an old man. Could it have been an old woman? Maybe. Maybe. But again, this was an ancient culture where men had the power, and the women were probably home taking care of the children. They wouldn't have been making paintings. So it had to be a man, and it had to be an old man. But why spit? Well, if you do a little research, you will find that in a lot of magic potions, spittle is a major ingredient, the main ingredient. How many times have you seen it in the movies where the witch spits into a cauldron? There's the magic. I said to my friend, if we take out the spit of old men, what makes the paintings come to life? She said, oh, you're right. The story would not have been the story without the paintings coming to life. So the spit of old men was necessary. And this is what I mean by the story being most important. Not more important than the audience, although in this case, she was aware that the audience was uncomfortable, but changing the story to suit the audience would have been inappropriate. Now, if that were the case, she could have explained a little bit up front, and that would be taking care of your audience. Or she could have just not told that story. But to change it would have made it not the same story, not even the most powerful story, the same experience. So, 1, take care of the audience. 2, you have a responsibility toward the story. And 3, you're last. You have to make sure you've had enough to eat and you've slept and you don't have the smoke blinding you, and that you're comfortable and you're not too hot and you're not too cold, and all those things that you would do to take care of your audience. But you are the least important thing in the whole scenario. Now, there is a bardic culture, let's say, where the bard has importance and needs to have charisma, needs to come into the circle and be able to manage the audience and the setting and have a stage presence. But if the bard comes in to the circle and says, I am Gabrielle d'Auvergne, I'm going to tell you a story, even if you don't want to hear one, I'm going to tell it anyway, and this is the story it's going to be, and look, everybody just shut up and listen to me, then they have not done their job as a storyteller. The storyteller should disappear, and the story takes over. And the story reaches out and touches the audience. But guess what? That won't happen if you let your ego be the most important thing in the triad of storytelling. So again, it's audience first, story second, you last, if at all. So those are things I really try to stress and impress with my storytellers. And to be honest, if you just do those 3 things, you don't have to be the greatest storyteller in the world. People will want to hear you. And that's our number 1 goal, being heard. It takes 2 people to tell a story, someone to tell it and someone to listen. And so your listeners are just as important as anything else, and as I've already stated, the most important. The storyteller of the Middle Ages had a great deal of importance to the community. I have heard that the storytellers could travel almost as freely as the royalty without permission to come and go. They were their own people, but of course every artist looks for a patron, and so there were many artists and storytellers and bards who basically worked for a royal. They got paid, they got their food, they got their bed, but you know, when you put yourself in that situation, you kind of owe the king or whoever your patron is, you owe them your homage. You have to give them, make them look good. So I would rather be a freewheeling bard and get out of town if the king got mad at me. But that's neither here nor there. I would just want to do my very best job. So I'd like to give you one more little bit of advice before we look at the Storyteller's Toolbox. And that is that with the spoken word comes responsibility. I mentioned responsibility to the story and to the audience. Being a word crafter, a wordsmith, a bard who uses words, I already said you could make or break a king. You have to ask yourself, should I or shouldn't I? There's a responsibility that comes with using words. Words have power. There's a very old story. I don't know, it might be Jewish, but there was a woman who passed rumors around about another woman. So the woman passing rumors, we could say she was a storyteller. She went around and she told everybody how this other woman snuck around on her husband and maybe was very rude and stinky and all kinds of rumors about her. And word came to that other woman that the storyteller was saying all of this about her. And so she went to the court. She found herself a good judge, and she turned this other woman, turned the storyteller in to the judge and said, she's spreading rumors about me, and I've lost my husband, and I've lost my family, and I've lost my home, and I've lost my good reputation, all because of her. And the judge listened to both women, and this was the judgment that he made. He said to the storyteller, tomorrow, bring your bed pillow, and we will go on a little field trip. And so the next day, for court, the storyteller brought her bed pillow. It's made of feathers, you know. And the judge took her, with the rest of the court, up on top of a mountain. And he said, let me have your pillow. And she gave him the pillow, and he ripped it open, and feathers flew everywhere. And he said, now, go and pick up all the feathers and bring them back to me by tomorrow. What? Said the woman. I can't do that. How am I going to find all those feathers? How am I going to get them all back again? And he said, that's it, exactly. What you have done to this woman, you can never undo. So I find you guilty of spreading false rumors. It's just a little story. Be very careful if you decide to take on the journey of the bard and the storyteller. Know that you have responsibility when you do that. I guarantee if you take that responsibility and you take it seriously, you're going to have so much fun as a storyteller. I've given you the really serious stuff. Now let's look at the tools of the storyteller. So just think to yourself for a moment. What does the storyteller use? They use words. The more words you know, the better. Yeah? They use their bodies. There's a lot of body language in storytelling. This is one reason why, if I were to write this class down for you, you wouldn't have any of my body movements or my facial expressions. You would have no cues as to the actual meaning of what I was saying. So body language, facial expression, words, those are 3 so far. I did research years ago for my master's degree in education, and the master's degree was my hypothesis was that storytelling would be more effective for teaching language disabled children to read, to comprehend the stories they were reading, and hearing, to comprehend stories, than if they just read it. And of course we had a whole control group and a test group, and everything was very controlled. And my theory was that the face and the body language, and a fourth tool in the storyteller's toolbox, intonation, how the words are said, where the emphasis is placed, that those cues would help those students to understand the story better than if they just read it. There's another dimension to the story when it's being told to you live and in person. So, and we actually did find that was true. It was a small percentage, but it was true. So that would be a test, a thesis that somebody could expand on. So, words, face, body language, intonation, those are all in the storyteller's toolbox, and of course the stories themselves, which you can spend a lifetime learning. But I would urge you, if you are just starting out as a storyteller, get yourself 4 solid stories. They don't have to be long, and they could be stories you already know. They could be stories you write. They can be stories you hear other storytellers tell, as long as you are sure that it is okay for you to tell their stories. Sometimes they might be original stories, or they may have done something special to the story to make it their own. So always get permission from another storyteller before you do that. Or go out and do your own research on that story and make it your own, which you should do anyway. So those are the tools that are in the storyteller's toolbox. And we're going to come back in our next lesson, and we're going to look at each one of those tools a little bit more carefully, and we're going to talk about where to find stories, how to craft them, and in part 2 of the storytelling basics. This is the Storyteller Academy at Pennsic. I am Mistress Gabrielle D'Auvergne. Happy tales.